right.
Hello, this is Monarchism Unfiltered. I am.
This is Bronze.
And I'm McCosk.
And we're here today with Token.
Yeah.
Who
It's the
has
second
decided-
ever guest, so that's exciting.
This episode's topic will be Africa in specific.
Oh boy, this will be fun.
Yeah, so obviously the first thing we need to do is we need to discuss why Rhodesia is
No,
quote
shut up.
unquote based and red pilled, quote unquote, and why monarchists should support racist republicans. That's like the highest goal of monarchism is republics but racist. This is what I've learned from engagement with people online. Token, would you like to speak about that?
Oh boy, this will be fun. Yeah, I hear about them all the time, especially amongst monarchists, regardless of their political stance, where you'll see shilling for Rhodesia on a regular basis, especially in cough cough, our monarchism. And it's confusing, frankly, because Rhodesia and also, just to add this on, apartheid South Africa were very overtly Republican. They were known for repressing African monarchies, the paramount chieftaincies, etc., etc. And like, let's not forget about the fact that apartheid South Africa, also regularly intervened in Swaziland, Lesotho, etc.
Yeah. And the most obvious thing was internally in South Africa, the
homelands.
Yeah, hiring and firing chieftains was the most common thing. Deposing chieftains if they were
Like,
non-compliant.
off the top of my head, so not to interrupt you, but like off the top of my head, for African monarchies, the ones that the South Africans didn't completely screw over were the Zulu, KwaZulu or whatever, Zululand.
Yep.
Dude, given like the tendencies of the Zulu monarchy and Zulu nationalists cooperate with the nationalists in Pretoria.
That's the only ones I can really think of as well that like cooperated, because all the Xhosa chieftains were fairly anti-apartheid, pro ANC or like whatever. And same for the
they're cuck.
Yeah, because I think it was Pixley Iksheme, the founder of the ANC, who was the personal lawyer of the King of Swaziland. So yeah, so like obviously the Swazis and the Sotho, Southern Lesotho, were not particularly friendly towards South African government. And obviously the same is true in Rhodesia, where and in Central African Federation, where and with British colonialism in general, that there was a generalized case of deposing traditional monarchs and shuffling around monarchs so that you would find the people who are compliant and so forth.
This was also an issue in Transkei, I think, and Ciskei.
Ciskei, yeah, Transkei and Ciskei.
Ciskei.
Yeah, because it's the basic.
And that didn't make sense in its own right, given that they were both. I think this is how you pronounce it, Xhosa.
Xhosa.
Xhosa. I can't pronounce Southern African words.
I can't.
I'm just not going to say anything.
I can't do clicks, so like I can't really speak on this. But
like what clicks? I could probably do the clicks, but they'd come out weird.
Yeah, no, I'm not even going to bother. I have family who can, but like I've never been able to.
Come on, bro, speak Afrikaans.
No, I can't really be bothered. But I think one of the key issues that you find in right-wing circles in general, in regards to Africa in general, is like a kind of bizarre misunderstanding of like what the colonizers even were trying to do, because there is a like significant degree to which the colonizers of Africa were essentially trying to impose various forms of liberal projects upon Africa. I mean, the French are the most obvious with this. The British do it as well to like varying degrees, but there is explicitly the justification for colonialism was the concept of like modernization. That they were there in Africa to uplift the people, where uplifting was explicitly viewed in the terms of the extension of liberal values, the um, rollout of democracy, science, whatever, these sort of buzzwords, as it were.
Turns out trying to implement hyper-modern liberal projects in a climate that is simply not in which in a climate where simply they don't work or outright just a superficial a surface level attempt tends to result in horrible loss of human life.
Yeah, I mean the obvious issue.
Rwanda, Burundi.
Yeah, I mean I think those are very clear cases of.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you, but like Rwanda and Burundi are like the most fucked up cases off the top of my head.
Yeah, I
Given
mean,
given the nature of ethnicity in Rwanda now, as opposed to pre-colonial Rwanda and Burundi, it just the Germans and the Belgians fucked up so badly in that regard because I'm going to like ethnicity in those two regions, the general Hutu, Tutsi, Twa regions, is that it was not very solid. It was very fluid at the time. Matter of fact, it was more class and clan rather than solid ethnicity, and that resulted in. And when the Belgians and the Germans came in, right, they ended up marking a sort of period of rigid ethnic stratification, being extremely arbitrary in what was and what wasn't a Tutsi, with their Semitic nature, their Ethiopian origin, which doesn't make sense given as I'm Ethiopian. And overall, just this retarded notion of like light-skinned, thin-nosed blacks who were supposedly superior to the flat-nosed and footed Congolese Hutus.
In general, colonial rule marked extreme stratification. The most hilarious example being the case. Again, this is not Africa, but like the most emblematic one is the caste system in India, where before the British it was slowly dying off under the Mughals and the Marathas, but under the Brits it came back to life with a vengeance. This is a
yeah, I
similar
mean,
a pattern in all other colonial endeavors.
yeah, I mean
Oh yeah, no, this is also the case in Rwanda, Burundi, where it wasn't necessarily dying off, but it was slowly forming in how do I say coalescing into a sort of bureaucracy, military expansion thing with the kings of the 18th century in Rwanda and Burundi pursuing expansion in order to access greater revenues, resources, etc., etc. And at some very high up level, anyone could become Tutsi, which is roughly meaning aristocratic. This is also a pattern in other African states, Kanem Bornu, Ethiopia, uh, and various other West African polities.
I mean, Kanem Bornu was far older and arguably was in decline, but still highly organized at the time.
Yeah, Kanem Bornu was just something else.
Bornu was fucking epic.
yeah,
Yeah.
African cataphracts. But I mean I think. I mean, again, what you see there, I think, as well, has to be understood, at least in the way that the Germans and the Belgians were thought about it. They understood it to be like, oh, we need to modernize these people and give them like ethnicity, like an understanding of like nation, basically.
Nation state.
Yeah, nation state, and that's explicitly what the Belgians were doing post-war, because prior under the Germans they had this sort of racialized idea of like we're going to, like, the Tutsis are like the Aryans, and so they're like the warrior, the martial people, as it were. So we're gonna put them in, like, we're gonna have them be the top dogs, and they're like uh, a martial caste, and they've they're whatever, like they're migrants who've taken over these Congolese people, who I think was the belief. Then the Belgians came along and were like, oh, whoa, the Hutus are an ethnicity, they're a nation. We need to like put them in charge and be like democratic or whatever.
And that's what led to the whole mess of like the 1960s,
Yeah,
where Hutu nationalism came to dominate after the whole 1961 social uprising. It wasn't a revolution; it was more of an uprising. And then Hutu nationalism becomes the status quo up until 1994, when the Tutsi-dominated Rwandan Patriotic Front under Paul Kagame, who still rules today, instead entrenched Tutsi-dominant
Yeah.
hegemony, whatever. And about the whole Aryan thing, that was applied to many African colonies, but it was also a thing in independent Ethiopia and Liberia. Not that they were necessarily dominated by these Semitic or Anglo assimilated races, but more so that they were successful because they were ruled by these seemingly white or like semi-white elites.
You said that about Liberia. Is that I've never heard that.
No.
I've heard about Ethiopia.
No, it was a thing in Liberia too, especially with the mulattoes and the certain parts of the the blacks, the American blacks who came to and founded Liberia.
That's. I mean, I won't lie. That's like pretty epic because, I mean,
Shut the fuck up.
no, I mean, just on the level that because they were doing the whole Masonic Lodge thing, and the
No, they weren't really Freemasons in the conventional sense. They didn't really follow any of the Masonic rite or Enlightenment shit. It was just used as a sort of secret society / political tool thing.
yeah, but that's like
They were never really in coordination with the Scottish rites.
I mean, okay, but like it was a collection of Christian secret societies, like coordinated to like stopping like any kind of self-determination or like any kind of democracy.
That's not necessarily true. They didn't have a problem with this, but how do I put this? Like they very much wanted to retain Americo-Liberian dominance in that sense, but they were never adverse to self-determination wholly.
Well, they yeah, I mean, I just think because the thing with like Liberia is it seems to me that what they were doing was like the most sort of explicit form of like elite domination of democracy in
Oh no, that was the thing.
because
At
like,
best, Liberia was semi-democratic. Like it was very democratic in for Africa, but at the same time, it was democratic for Africa. You know, it was dominated by an Americo-Liberian caste.
yeah, I mean, obviously, and I think they also had like anti-race mixing laws, I believe. Like you,
Oh yeah, no, they did.
which
And they also had like laws where only Negroes could, where only people of Black or Negro descent could immigrate, hold law, property tax. It was the same thing in Haiti too.
yeah, I mean, in Haiti that led to the in Haiti it wasn't.
In Haiti, that just led to the Germans and the Poles
Yeah.
intermarrying into the elite mulatto classes, which came to dominate after the 1915 American intervention.
Yeah. Whereas in Liberia, to my knowledge, they banned miscegenation as well, like foreigners.
Oh no, they did.
Yeah, which is like
They did.
different. And is I mean it's funny because like I mean there's like parts of the US now that would probably be pro that in terms of like black sections of the population who'd be anti-miscegenation laws, but who would be pro anti.
There are also a number of African ethnic groups who generally oppose miscegenation. Like the Tigrayans in northern Ethiopia, like they will fucking meme and or frown upon any sort of mixing with other groups, even if they are Ethiopian or Black.
What, like Somalis or whatever?
No one cares about the Somalis in Ethiopia.
Okay, well,
I mean, and Somalis themselves don't generally mix with anyone else.
Yeah, I mean I think the interesting part, at least about democracy in Africa, at least in relation to monarchies, to sort of keep it back more on topic, I think there is an interesting way in which traditional leadership and chieftains, paramount chiefs, whatever, do still retain a lot of power in a way
They
that
do. This is like, not to interrupt you, but this is apparently this is very present in places like Nigeria, Botswana, and then Somaliland. Not Somalia proper, just northern Somaliland, where they synthesize the sort of traditional government with the paramount chiefs occupying the upper senate and the lower, I think, chamber of delegates or representatives, being elected by the people.
I mean, that's interestingly quite similar to like what the UK is theoretically. I mean, I would guess that their upper Senate is like more active than the House of Lords, but yeah, I mean, you find similar things in South Africa, obviously, with the
Like, if you want some sort of ideal version of constitutional monarchy and democracy coming together in Africa, I would recommend looking at Botswana.
yeah.
They managed to preserve some native institutions while also mixing them with like British common law and liberalism.
I mean, the interesting part there, at least, is the fact that I, because obviously the first president, the first independent president was I can't remember his name now, but he was he was paramount chief, I think, for a while before like renouncing it, or either that or he was the crown prince. And his son, I think, is currently president or was president. So I mean, there is still a significant degree to which traditional leadership are like occupy the primary places of power.
No, this is the case for a lot. It's the case for a lot of African states. Uganda had this arrangement when it became independent in '62, right? The Kabaka occupied the presidency. The Bugandans generally occupied a central role. The rest of the constituent kingdoms also were protected by the constitution until like Milton Obote came in conflict with all of them because he was an African socialist who wanted to sort of mimic Tanzania, even though the Tanzanians didn't generally fuck with even like Julius Nyerere, the classical African socialist, didn't want to mess with traditional leadership. But that just became a clusterfuck after a while, especially when the Tanzanians invaded under Idi Amin.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
and talking about Uganda, there was actually a revival of monarchist sentiment back in the '90s, but they've kind of just mixed with like these radical Islamic groups.
In Uganda.
Yeah, in Uganda.
Yeah, it's an issue in many African monarchist movements, shall we say, that they either get mixed up with ethnicity or they get mixed up with religion. Typical,
No, and it
typical.
was weird too because
I
they
mean,
were
it's
at first it was only superficial. That's the thing, right? They only did it for the help from like Sudan because the Sudanese and Ugandans were constantly at conflict. It didn't help that this was overall a part of the Congo Wars,
yeah,
I mean,
and we all know how that went.
yeah. I think at least to me, the interesting part then of it seems at least to me that in a certain way, you still have a lot of these old traditional tribal structures that exist across Africa that, to a certain degree, like exist at one level with these kind of national governments that try to present democratic fronts and so forth at the national or international level. Because
It's
I mean,
ironic too because a lot of these subnational monarchies are often more democratic than the national state, like in not apartheid South Africa. South Africa now, where KwaZulu is now more diverse when it comes to multi-party politics, as opposed to the rest of South Africa, which is dominated by the African National Congress.
yeah. I mean, and yeah, ANC and EFF. I think I would argue are the two main parties. But Yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting because I remember reading in because Julia, I was reading about Julius Nyanaira, and someone who was proposing that he be made a saint. One of
Based
I think it was the Archbishop of Dar es Salaam or something, or like Tanzania.
Dar es Salaam. Hmm.
I
He
don't know
should
what.
be made a saint. The man was a king.
Yeah, I mean, the guy was asked, oh, like, oh, wasn't he? They had this interview with the bishop, and they asked the bishop, oh, what about the fact that like he ran a one party state? Isn't that sort of somewhat bad or whatever? And he was like, oh well, in Africa we now have all these sort of hundreds of parties, but it's basically just one party anyway, and we all debate in that party. So it's like, who cares about one party state?
Yeah. Julius Nyerere also pointed out the whole thing, how he has this famous quote about how the United States, with typical American extravagance, have a two-party state.
Yeah,
It's very
well,
amusing.
yeah,
Like, what was the party called? Fuck, in Tanzania, the
it was.
CCM or whatever. They had a very robust party. No, that's not the word for it. They were generally very diverse in the party. It was never a monolith of opinions or whatever. Democratic centralism and all that.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting part, um, at least I think with the situation now, um, in a lot of countries in Africa, it seems that political parties, whereas previously it had kind of been, we have one party and the party rules and so on and so forth, was the case in most of Africa. Um, Now you kind of have a case of there's a lot of ethnicities, and the ethnicities will have their own parties, and people vote along ethnic lines, generally, from what I
Yeah,
can tell. Um,
yeah,
but the,
that's a big issue in Ethiopia too, with ethnic federalism, which I don't necessarily have a problem with, but I have a problem with the way federal power is like eroded since the death of Meles Zenawi, and generally that it gives too much power to the outlying regions, which has been a big issue historically in the country.
yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I would agree. I mean, especially with like Eritrea and so forth.
Eritrea is something else. It's hilarious.
I connect it just on the level that I think the it seems to be quite a strange situation in a lot of places where you have these kinds of anti-central parties, and a lot of the time they kind of are ambivalent towards the central state. They usually aren't pro independence unless it's like you know English Cameroonians, or English speaking Cameroonians, or some a group similar to that. Most of the time it seems like people are like will have these ethnic parties, but then not particularly be pro
Relevant.
independence. Yeah, like it will. Yeah, it's sort of a strange situation. I mean, I know that in Ethiopia, I believe they all seem to have like the same name half the time, because like you
The
can
what? I'm sorry, your mic cut out for a minute.
they'll all seem to
The
have the
same one?
same name, so it would be like
Oh, that.
600
Not
different
anymore. Now
political
it's just
parties.
one party,
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
the Prosperity Party.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it and they have, yeah. It's names like Prosperity Party, or like Socialist Liberation Front, or like and I mean this
That's
really,
because they all started as rebel groups in the civil wars of the 70s.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I got where that's from, but it's just like you very often I find you get into these cases where you have like word salad party names.
And they all have like retarded transliteration because they're all Latin scripts.
Yeah, 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 and yeah, most of the time they're sort of very squabbling. I think there is
It's annoying
a
too, frankly. Um, Given the whole nature of party politics now in Ethiopia, where it's just ethnicity, 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 and as someone who's like is generally associated of being, it doesn't help that I'm Ethiopian monarchist either. Given the whole nature of how monarchy is now associated with ethnic Amhara or just Habesha dominance in general. It doesn't help that there was a recent regional coup d'état that I'm pretty sure everyone heard about, where it's just Amhara nationalism, etc., etc. It's
Yeah, I mean,
really retarded.
yeah, I mean, I think that I think is the one of the big issues, especially in um, places like South Africa, where you have like South Africa. I think is probably the most interesting, just because it's the only place I can really think of that had any kind of functioning self government to any degree. Um,
For its
w-
monarchies or what?
yeah, well, no, in terms of it wasn't a pure colony like Rhodesia and the Central African Federation. I think is the only other state where it was you had the Queen of England,
I mean,
and
given
then
the
like
nature of the Union of South Africa in colonial times, that does make sense. As
yeah,
well as
and
the British actually knowing when to fuck off when it came to native affairs.
yeah, and I think it's interesting in that respect that you have, at least in South Africa, that in the history of South Africa you have kind of two levels of monarchy, which you don't have in most other places, where it's like one level you have the kind of national monarchy of Union of South Africa up until I think it was the 70s, and then the local level tribal paramount chieftains, so on and so forth. Um, because obviously they didn't that wasn't the case in France. It wasn't the case really with the Germans. The Germans were very centralized.
I
Um,
find it ironic that the fascist, well, not necessarily, well, yes, especially with Italy and Francoist Spain, which I don't count as fascist, where they actually tried to respect native governance in some ways, but then like more so than the colonial states that we see in Britain and liberal, the rather more liberal France, supposedly. Um, like Franco was Spain, or at least during the Civil War and afterwards, you saw this pattern where Franco, and I'm pretty sure Makas could tell you this, but still, where Franco actually sort of respected the Moroccans' rights and knew when to fuck off, whereas Republican Spain consistently interfered in the affairs of the Moroccans and tried to build off a sort of assimilationist model in like that of France, where they tried to assimilate most of the natives, or at the very least, the elite class.
mm, that is quite interesting. I mean, I haven't heard about that before, but I remember when I was like 14 or whatever, I read uh, Ode Homage to Catalonia, and he specifically made the point in there that one of like the most basic mistakes the Republic made was it never promised freedom to the Moroccans. Um, so like, and he considered that to be like a really moronic thing, like failure to do. They didn't sort of endorse the Republic of the Rif. I think was the rebellion against Franco.
More like their most foremost problem was just fucking with the Moroccans in every sense and not knowing when to stop. Like, I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure Franco made this a central issue. Like, he was consistently telling them, he and like everyone else in the Spanish colonial administration in Morocco was just like, no, please stop messing with the Moroccans. We're only starting to get to them now.
Mm,
During the massive cataclysmic failure that was the Spanish Rif campaign, of where such thing as you don't need to know to read maps in order to go to war, and other such adventures of Spanish incompetence. The the even the most racist Spanish officer, well, the racist ones didn't survive, but even those who were racist enough to not be killed, even they grew to respect the Moroccan Rif tribes out of at least their sheer ability to resist. So really it was the Moroccan resistance, and well, the Republic of the Rift, and really the fact that they were just good fighters and were relatively well equipped and organized for the time, was really the root point of why like people like Franco started respecting them. That and also other factors like particularly administrative, because the Republic, in a hilarious move, I suppose, that with absolutely zero foresight, said, "Let's kick off the politically unreliable generals to the colonies." Ironically enough, copying something Portugal did that also came to bite Portugal in the ass later. Decide, okay, let's kick them off the colonies. What could they do? What they could do, it was basically create the first professional regiments the Spanish army had had in 300 years, the famous Moroccan regiments, and that basically led and set the blueprint to a Moroccization of the remainder of the Spanish army, which was also like a leading factor in
The
the,
Moroccans were true Spaniards.
yeah, and like the organization of the nationalist forces as time went on, being progressively better and better and better.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that, like, how the Moroccans also ended up weirdly being, uh, in some cases, like the Spaniards themselves admitted this. They ended up being, excuse me,
I think his point
Yeah,
was,
yeah.
yeah, more Spanish
Um,
than the Spaniards.
the joke is that like they they respected the Virgin Mary and like traditional saints more than the Spaniards themselves did. And there was this one recorded instance where it's like a Moroccan had to be held back from like blowing up a Republican POW with a grenade because it was found out that they desecrated the church,
I mean, have
which is
you?
hilarious in its own right.
I mean, I think it. There's
it's
a.
based is what it is.
It is based. There's a part of the Hadith, I believe it is, where when they enter into where they enter in, when they enter back into Mecca, and they destroy the idols in the Kaaba. Um, uh, Muhammad specifically orders that the images of Abraham, Christ, and Mary not be destroyed.
Yeah,
Um,
that was also a thing in during the Spanish Civil War where it's like, you know, the Francoists not wanting to, you know, piss off the Moroccans, they tried to remove idols and of traditional Christian figures like the ones you pointed out. And the Moroccans, wounded and whatnot, actually protested against this. And they said the Virgin, and one was quoted as saying, "No, the Virgin Mary is good for everyone."
yeah, because I mean that is the even in traditional Sunni art, and the Sunnis are generally more generally stricter on um, images of people. Um, Generally, they will only the only people that they images of people that they will depict is Christ, Mary, and Christ and Mary, basically. Generally, not Abraham, and I do find that quite interesting. But the yeah, I mean, I think what you find quite consistently, at least, and I think you were correct to raise this in relation to France, the Republican modernizing project, um, or the Spanish Republicans in relation to Morocco, is that um, the difference between, say, Spain, France, and Britain was the degree to which they were attempting to modernize these countries. I mean, the Germans, especially, I think, this show this quite clearly, where the Germans understood themselves to be like uplifting the native African population. And I think that's fairly interesting to think about, at least in the context of something like the Herero and Namqua genocides.
Yep. Funnily enough, this ended up with the Germanophone or whatever, Tanzanians being attracted to National Socialism in the 1930s.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and you have the interesting sort of yeah. I mean, I think I think it was the Colonial Bund. He tried to use it as evidence, like tried to use it to try and
Oh
get.
yeah, that picture of that one Cameroonian chief or wearing a Prussian Prussian armor or whatever, you know, in a
Yeah,
funeral procession.
Yeah.
both
Yeah.
the whole fucking colonial organizations in Nazi Germany tried to use as evidence of surviving German culture and thus an excuse to recolonize.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the Nazis themselves weren't so interested in that. It was more the.
I mean, no, not really. It was more of a foreign policy ploy.
Well, I mean, it was more specifically. Von Ribbentrop was like interested, like was really into recolonization, and like the reactionaries in general, the sort of reactionary element of
Yeah,
the Nazi coalition. Whereas,
basically the old school conservatives and stuff.
yeah, yeah, I mean, and I think that it is quite interesting that the Spanish reactionary whatever were less into this kind of modernization than say
And they were more into like I don't know if ethno-pluralism would be the word for it, like integralism and local
national.
autonomy. You know, they're really big on that, and so were the Portuguese, if I remember
Well,
correctly.
the issue here is that, and especially in regards to Spanish versus Portuguese colonialism, is that there are three phases to non-British colonialism. Because let's be honest, this is what we're talking about: Spanish, Japanese colonialism not included in this category. In that you have the first bit from like the 1400s to like the 1800s, give or take, which is old imperialism, is how it's sometimes themed, in which it's our attempt at settler colonialism, and those attempts are characterized by high levels of miscegenation, comparatively low levels of violence, especially when compared to the following phase, and a lot of let's marry into the local aristocracy kind of deal. So that's how both empires had their start. The thing that happened with the Spaniards is that their empire kind of died in the 1800s, and so they never really truly shifted from this. They did try to adapt some elements of like new imperialism or new colonialism in the 1800s with like stuff like cash crops and the like, but they never kind of went that far with it. So they kind of remained in this more traditionalistic, shall we say, approach. The
Yeah,
Portuguese, meanwhile, during the 1800s, you have the famous campaigns, which were really yeah, yo, let's gather up them boys and give them guns and go into the heart of Angola and Mozambique and shoot up shit, basically. We like supposedly there were chiefs that complied, and we still sent troops there to like murder shit so we could like show the quote unquote results, and then the Brits stabbed on us. Though this
Yeah.
period, yeah,
didn't you guys like fuck with a bunch of Christianized African kingdoms in Angola who wanted to stop the slave trade, like Alfonso the First?
yeah, we fucked up in that regard, like massively. But in the 1800s, especially as you come closer and closer to the end of the monarchy, you have some like attempts at reform and making this like less horrifying. But come the British ultimatum, come the regicide, everything, and then come the Republic, and the Republic was just hyper colonialist but incompetent to the extreme, and does nothing until 1926, when the military coup happens and the first plans of colonial reform come into place that only really are put into place with Salazar. And under Salazar, it can be characterized as forced labor, yo. It's not slavery, but forced labor, to the point that we cause the demographic collapse in northern Angola. Millions probably died. God knows, our statistics aren't that good. And supposedly all to produce such shit tier cotton that when Portuguese fabric industries bought it, they were forced to bought it, the first thing they did was burn it. So yeah, a whole lot of suffering for a whole lot of nothing in the end point is what characterizes the final affairs of Portuguese colonialism.
Yeah, and to add on that, didn't like you guys basically tear up anything that wasn't tied down and then take it with you to Portugal?
But that's because like has like After World War II, Salazar starts realizing, well, we have to do something. You had some surrealistic attempts at creating ideal settlements in which, I shit you not, of entire Portuguese villages in the middle of like bumfuck nowheresville, Portugal, were transplanted into the heart of Africa. Like, not brick by brick, but they were copied down to the letter. And well, the people weren't copied; they were literally just transported over there. So
I've
when,
left race down in Africa.
yep, and well, when colonialism ended, like these new type ideal settlements got well, their nature really got
Really
revealed. And,
dominating.
yeah, older settlements with whites did remain there for a while. Nowadays, I'm not familiar that much with the situation of the whites that sided with the independence movement, because Angolan and Mozambican independence had more weirder undertones, because because we have evidence of a lot of the like start like the early revolutionary and independence leaders, their stated goal was to validate their rights as Portuguese citizens, because there was a whole like Portugal also had a whole system of, if you know how to read and write Portuguese, you can be an assimilato, and your sons of an assimilato, if they know how to read and write Portuguese, become a full-blown Portuguese citizen. The now to those listening who might think, oh, but that's a low enough requirement, it really wasn't, because if you went by that requirement and applied it to mainland Portugal, only about 10% of the total population would qualify. There was it seems like a simple requirement, but when you realize there is literally no infrastructure for that anywhere at all, it really becomes something only the tribal chiefs and leaders can do. And hence why we had like an immense amount of African penetration in our colonial administration, but that often did not reflect in more humane policies.
Huh. That feeling when the Africans are more Portuguese than you are.
And the whole reason why no one talks about this is because there is a direct familial connection, because not it wasn't always just tribal chiefs. The people who cooperated on the oppression of Angola and Mozambique with the Portuguese are the people now ruling Angola and Mozambique, give or take. So it's one of those things you don't actually mention.
It doesn't help that Angola and Mozambique are also dominated by mestizos and mixed race peoples. How many? There's like 1 million Portuguese no, wait, hold up. How many Portuguese are there in Africa? Uh,
Can't be more than like five. So that's the absurd upper limit.
200,000.
Like
There's like
there's 500,000, I think. Like Angola,
according to
not just in Angola and Mozambique, but in Africa in abstract. I think there are 500,000 Portuguese and Portuguese descendant, because we count a person as being Portuguese until 4 generations separate from. So we can inflate the numbers of Portuguese in the planet and not feel bad for ourselves that we're slowly going extinct.
yeah, there's 300,000 of you in South Africa, and let's see, 40,000 in Mozambique, and like a little under 20,000 for each of your other colonies. And meanwhile, there's 40 million of you in Brazil.
Ouch! That dab on Brazil, though.
I
Oh
mean,
no, bronze.
I mean at least in terms of in South Africa, the under apartheid, the Portuguese and the Greeks were the primary people who would like um, own all of the corner stores. So most corner shops, especially in the Cape, were owned by either Greeks or Portuguese people. So
Base.
that so there's still like Portuguese language schools and like Greek schools
That
in
that joke, but that is like the general pattern. Like when during the Berlin conference, when the Brits were shitting on us, they called our empire a bankrupt grocery store.
Imagine being roasted by the Anglos like that.
That is
Imagine
a
imagine being roasted by your by your ancient ally on a constant basis for like 500 years.
Imagine being. Oh my god, that's actually kind of depressing. But also to touch
Welcome,
on like the
welcome,
whole thing
welcome
about
to Portuguese existence.
yeah, for a time, Portuguese was like a focal language in Ethiopia because of like the role that they were playing during the 1500s. You know, when you guys weren't subverting the Ethiopian Orthodox Church,
Yeah,
they were
we
very close ties.
yeah we believe we 1,000% believed you guys to be Prester John, and well, we believed anyone who said they were Prester John to be Prester John. We one point straight up mounted an invasion of Iraq because we thought the Mandeans were Prester John. We thought, well, we have to free the Prester Johnites, and then we got there, and this ain't Christian though, and we backed out.
I mean,
Oh,
they're Johnite Christians. Jonine Christians is the term. But I mean, it does seem to me that Portugal, like it kind of was a
Colony.
bankrupt corner store of a colonial empire. Um,
I
like
mean, the general rule of law, like if you really want to be woke on Portuguese history, you say we were the most autonomous dominion that the UK ever had.
don't you mean
Because
Brazil?
no, because like the base logic is that all of our Brazilian gold went to Britain because of like the Between Treaty and shit like that. So like 500 million like pounds sterling in gold was what quote unquote the Portuguese alliance slash trade treaty gave to the British. One of the
Yeah,
wokest one of the wokest take is that the British Empire started declining the moment Brazilian gold dried up.
at this point, just annex Brazil to fucking Portugal. At least you guys would. Maybe you guys would actually revive your demographic collapse with this.
I mean, considering that Brazil is still having a demographic explosion and that explosion is destroying the Amazon River, I don't actually think that's good. Plus, Brazil is like it has its issues, but Brazil is a solid country. Come on, mate.
Also, they have compulsory military service.
I know.
We should have that for Africa, SMH.
And don't most
you
have
and
it?
Nyanera.
No, most African countries don't actually have compulsory military service. They can press you into service, but like off the top of my head, the only countries that do have it in like sub-Saharan Africa are like Burundi, Angola, Mozambique, and like maybe Chad. Chad.
I mean, most African countries don't have the state capacity to um, enforce conscription.
For whatever reason, the Chadians, despite having been in a civil war for like the
That's
past
why they
decade or
can do
so,
it. Because, like,
yeah,
when you're in a civil war, you generally quickly develop the ability to conscript people.
I think Burundi has like the most interesting process where it's like they did it because of the Congo Wars because they were basically trying to invade the Congo, right? And interestingly enough, Burundi probably has the most chance of restoring its monarchy, like Africa-wise at least.
I mean,
Even
yes,
even more so.
national monarchy. Yes, I've heard of some subnational monarchies that are also like coming close to it.
I mean,
Oh yeah, the thing is that
most
like
of the
Burundi already
sorry, I
like
just
not
wanted
even subnational. Sorry, my point was that Burundi already has like a monarchist presence in its government, the Parliamentary Monarchist Party, where they would
that.
probably restore some sort of Jordan-esque system, given that they've already restored the clan system as we know it. Um, and given that they have some sort of presence in the military with predominantly Tutsi officer corps.
Interesting. I mean, yeah, because I mean they were a Tutsi military dictatorship for a while, similar to what
For
Rwanda.
most of their history.
Yeah.
Like on the surface, their government looks like Hutu power, etc., etc. Um, it's really funny to be honest, because now they signed some accord after in the early 2000s with a bunch of Hutu power parties in order to, make them seem like they weren't dominated by Tutsis, but they totally are.
I mean,
Like
especially
the
with
only
Rwanda.
Rwanda's just straight up dominated by Tutsis.
I
Despite
mean,
the fact that you can't really talk about ethnicity there, like they're dominated by it. Like all the Hutus in government, even those who are senior, have to be paired with a bunch of Tutsi advisors.
mm,
It's a meme.
yeah, I mean,
Frankly,
I
I'm
mean, it
sorry.
makes sense. No. I mean, it makes sense why because of the like Hutu power genocide and all that. I mean, it was like,
That's the thing. The genocide didn't even stop after like 1994. It just kept going on into the 2000s.
well, yeah, because of the massacres in the refugee camps in
All around the Great Lakes. The
yeah.
Rwandans literally sent in operatives. And this was like the most evident in the Eastern Congo, right? Where there are already like huge numbers of Congolese Tutsis, numbering around 100,000. And the whole Congo, like, let's not forget this one thing. The Congo Wars were also a cover for like the Rwandans consolidating their power. For the
Yeah.
RPF, more specifically.
Yeah, I mean
And to this day, the FAR, the former Hutu power government, is still in the Congo, the Eastern Congo. They basically set up their own nation state there with a Hutu dominion.
I mean, they still exist largely because of like like Norwegian mining companies that want local
yeah.
backing, so they don't have to pay taxes, or like
Yeah, it's fucking hilarious. And they also exist because how do I put this? The Civil War, and because Mobutu, like leaders like Mobutu and Kabila, basically wanted to use them as a sort of means of trying to kick out the Rwandans, the Burundis, and the Ugandans from Eastern Congo.
yeah,
This was a direct impetus for like the Second Congo War, except Rwanda didn't directly win that.
yeah. I mean because like they won the first Congo War because no one liked Mobutu.
The first Congo War was basically them, everyone just ganging up on Mobutu and the Zairean state while it was dying.
I mean, he was like a massive dickhead. He was like,
Yeah, let's not make like I like Zairean aesthetic, right? I think Zaire is generally better looking service wise than like Democratic Republic of Congo and their fucking retarded flag.
Well,
But like
they change it on a semi-regular basis, though.
they what?
Kabila was a former communist, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Like his entire commitment to the first Congo War, other than becoming a Tutsi puppet, was like making grandiose Marxist speeches that no one listened to.
That's pretty epic.
Yeah,
I
he
mean,
was really kind, to be honest.
I mean, he was like completely incompetent. I mean, I know that his son is more competent than him, but like he only existed because of the Tutsis, and then like he got too big for his boots and
Yeah,
tried
that's
to
why like
overthrow.
that's why the Congolese government has been dominated by Congolese Tutsis too.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like a mess, really.
And that's why like there's so much anti-Tutsi sentiment that's bordering on anti-Semitism, you know? There was an excerpt from this book I read. It's a really good book on the Congo Wars and the politics in it in general. Dancing in the Glory of Monsters by Jason Stearns. Let me see if I can find this. In Congolese French, some words are known to illiterate farmers that educated Belgians in French rarely use. Morphology, I don't know how to pronounce French, was one of them. Banyamulenge, or Congolese Tutsis, would learn it as children, knowing that it connotated a vulnerability, a danger. His morphology is suspicious, one sometimes heard people saying when they suspected of someone of being Tutsi, as if you could tell someone's subversion by his bone structure or the slant of his nose.
That's an interesting.
That's fucking hilarious.
You know, can you clock his phenotype? Is the question every Hutu child must ask himself.
Der Tutsi.
Yeah, Kriegen siefte Kriegsverlangen.
Remember that
The-
dear Tootsie meme I sent you?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think the I mean, really because yeah, I mean, really I don't know how to summarize this, but it does seem to me that the distinction between, say, Africa and Europe, at least with most of the monarchies, is that the monarchies seem to me to be far more powerful and far more local level, sort of distributed, as it were. Other than maybe probably like Ethiopia, where where or in states where it was like where there was like a nation state with a monarchy, as it were. Like
Ethiopia in its own right had its own regional monarchies that we generally left alone, depending on whether or not they screwed us. Um, like the Jimma monarchy, the Jimma kingdom, which let me note that they also were slavers as late as the 30s, and that's what made Europe think that we were still doing slaves, even when we were trying to phase them out. Um, they were very autonomous depending on like how profitable they were. Like the Ausa of the Afar, they were very autonomous. They didn't rebel all that much. They still don't. They're like one of the only Muslim groups in Ethiopia that anyone likes. Um, they're pretty good.
they're in they're next to Djibouti, aren't they?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Also, because the Afar monarchy also pursued this sort of irredentist nationalism, and they basically want to annex all the Afar portions of the Horn, which is just northeastern Ethiopia, north eastern Eritrea, and all of Djibouti.
Mm. I mean, Eritrea doesn't make sense as a state. It's like,
I mean, think about it like this: Eritrea and Afars are the ones who push the most for a pan-Afar state under Ethiopian dominion.
I mean that I think Djibouti is like 50% Somali, 50% Afar, isn't it?
60% Somali.
60%, yeah.
Last time I checked, let me check. I think there's 60%. See, yeah, there's 60% Somali and the Afar like 35%. But the issue with that is that the
The
French,
Afar are richer, probably.
yeah, they're richer as fuck. Like they're
Um,
doing very well for themselves in Djibouti while they're doing terribly in Ethiopia, even though we don't do anything to them. Um, but at the same time, you have the issue with the French, like expelling Somalis on a regular basis to keep their hold on the on Djibouti in general. And you also have like a system where Afar was dominated by where Djibouti was dominated by Afar elites.
yeah, I mean, because the Somali tribes were like looked down upon and all this, but
They look down on everyone. Like, are you kidding me? They have, I don't want to like generalize, but at the same time, I have no problem doing it. Like, Somalis have this superiority complex that just doesn't make sense to me.
is it it's the sort of superiority
It's
complex of
basically we
like
was Wakandans.
is it like the superiority complex of like Serbs or something?
Yes, it's exactly like that. Holy shit, it's annoying. Like the whole Ogaden thing, Greater Somalia, Mo, we were gonna beat you in 1977. It gets annoying after a while, honestly. At least the Serbs had a chance at like raping the Bosnians, but that's it.
Okay, that's a big extreme. I mean, that is true, but like, I think to conclude on a more positive note, what I will say about like monarchy in general in Africa, it seems to me that that most that like Africa seems to me to be the one place where like monarchies are fairly healthy. I don't know if you'd agree. Like at least at the local level, it seems that most places have fairly strong monarchies. Other than places where they've had long-term civil wars or like or
Yeah, the more stable
Marxist on
states generally have a better chance. But the issue is like how tied in they and other monarchist organizations are with ethnicity and religion, as well as like popular conception of how, like, say, the Ethiopian monarchy is associated with Amharas and Habeshas, like myself, or like Rwanda and Burundi with Tutsis, and like best case scenario for monarchy, in my opinion, is like some sort of federation, or at least the idea of one, the perception of one, on a similar basis to the United Arab Emirates.
I mean, that seems to be what South Africa is at the moment.
South Africa, no, that's like what apartheid South Africa tried to do initially, with like a mix of like the UAE and the British Commonwealth homeland system.
Yeah, from also what I've read and been told, the big hope for monarchism in Africa in abstract, or sub-Saharan Africa, if we're being a bit more concrete, because like North Africa has its own dynamic that we won't go into detail just yet, is that basically the more popular solutions, the less ethnically tied ones, though in this term the term popular has a different connotation, is like a Malaysia style situation. Just obliterate the upper level state. All kingdoms now exist, and like the head of and like the government is like one king on a rotational basis for all the others, basically.
I mean, I think that would probably actually be better, like especially
Yeah,
in
that would be a good
Nigeria.
system. Like, at the same time, I'm suspicious of doing this because it generally provides a venue for like interventionism, etc., etc.
Yeah, like yeah, like the issue is I can understand why this would work in some areas, but like in others, like say like again anywhere in West Africa, it's dangerous. It's dangerous is all I'm saying. Like
I mean, West Africa's issues aren't. I mean, West Africa has the issue generally of like,
France.
yeah, like its issues. I don't, it's like, oh, we can have this monarchist system or whatever, but like, um, it's going to have issues so long as the French are around. Like, it's not reducible to like, oh, this monarchist formation wouldn't be like a good idea for West Africa. It's more just the current situation that they are in, where they are subordinated to France, is not a good situation. Um, and until like, they don't have to pay 25% of their budget or whatever to the French.
Yeah, and I don't want to be that guy either, but like African socialism also has its own legacy, which, despite ironically enough creating a homogenous and cohesive nation states like in Tanzania, Ghana, um, Mali. Well, no, not Mali. Mali's fucking shitty.
yeah,
Goddamn.
I was about to say Molly. You sure
Yeah,
you want to?
Ghana. Yeah,
They're all
Ghana.
everybody.
Yeah,
They're literally just discount Sudan.
yeah.
Which also suppresses its own monarchism. And the biggest issue is like a legacy of republicanism and socialism, which is so like deeply permeated Africa as we know it. And like you also have like people like Kwame Nkrumah, who I admire, but at the same time try to dismantle the paramount chieftaincies and the I'm probably not going to pronounce this right, but the Ashanti Kingdom in Ghana as we know it. And given the whole legacy of like colonialism and trying to suppress native monarchies and stuff,
It's not a good position, but it's not an insurmountable objection either, because as we see, we are seeing a revival of an appreciation of these local monarchies, at least in some states.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is in part because of the increasing economic development, where you've actually got local sort of business castes, which like wasn't the case, especially in early times. It was kind of usually it was just foreign-owned companies with local agents or whatever, or a case like in Uganda or Kenya where it was like dominated by Indian businessmen.
yeah, East Africa had
Um,
a whole issue. East and Southern Africa have a whole issue with Indian domination.
yeah, the
Like,
Guptas and so forth. Yeah, even to this day. Yeah, I mean the Guptas. I mean now you're probably going to see something similar with the Chinese.
Oh no, that's already happening.
Yeah, but aren't they also being violently kicked out?
No.
Oh no, I'm not. Let me put this very clearly. Africa is not happy with the Chinese. And I know how much of a Western statement that seems, but a lot of people are mad, given what the Chinese are doing, and it's not like the Chinese are, benevolent colonialism. Like I've seen the state of Chinese infrastructure in Africa myself. It's shit to begin with, and I have other friends over there who generally point out the reality of the Chinese presence and how fucking shit it is.
It's generally poorly made. Like a lot of the infrastructure they'll build is quite poorly made, which is how they can have the quick build times. But the bigger issue is just that the Chinese are the only people who aren't, like, the Chinese are better than the IMF. Basically, is the only reason that Africans like go to China for money and like projects. The bigger issue is just and the bigger issue basically just for most of these African states is that the Chinese bring in their own people, which generally means that one, you can't be as corrupt, which is a problem for a lot of these states. I mean, yeah, like I think, like just very corrupt states usually don't like the fact they can't be corrupt. But then also, other general issues.
Yeah, some issue doesn't help that they generally aren't like a lot of Chinese people will go to Africa from China proper, right? Marry into the native population, then divorce their wives after divorce their wives and husbands and other people lovers in order to gain citizenship, and then create their own Chinatowns there where they exclude other people from coming in, and generally are very discriminatory towards Native Africans.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I mean, I think to finish up, Mikoski wanted to say something.
I think to finish up is that, and this is more of a general admonishment to the average reader. Supporting racist republic is fucking stupid to a next level that I hope I wouldn't have to go into detail. But like I think just the sentence is pretty self-explanatory. So this has been Monarchism Unfiltered. I'm one of your hosts, Mikosk.
I am.
I'm a token Ethiopian.
Okay.
Wow,
Yeah,
wow.
we'll leave off there.
Yeah.